Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the European Ideas Forum 2021. I am Anna Nalivaiko, and I have the pleasure of guiding you through our two-day event with extremely interesting and timely discussions. Previously known as the Economic Ideas Forum, EIF is a Martin Center flagship event, and this year it takes on a broader scope to address some of the most pressing EU challenges. Held under the umbrella topic, A Roaring Twenties for Europe, Crisis and Opportunities in the Post-Pandemic Age, this event will bring you the expertise of relevant stakeholders in engaging discussions. To adapt to the special circumstances created by the pandemic, we are once again bringing to you a fully digital EIF. During these 2 days, we will have a total of 4 panel discussions of the duration of 1 hour each, as well as exclusive interviews and speeches with special guests. You can follow today's 2 panels on the Martin Center website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We also want to make this event as interactive as possible, so I do invite everyone who is watching online to participate. You can do so by leaving your questions and comments on social media using our hashtag EIF21, and by answering polls and surveys for each panel on slido.com using the event code EIF21. We also want to thank our partners for making the digital EIF happen, AB InBev, Apple, and Qualcomm. But before we officially kick off the event, let's walk through the history of EIF for the past decade. And for the official kickoff, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to the president of the Wilfried Martin Center for European Studies, Mikuláš Dzorinda, joining us here in the studio. Welcome, President.
Thank you, Anna. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Wilfried Martin Center for European Studies to the 12th edition of the European Ideas Forum, which you may know as the Economic Ideas Forum, its name during the previous years. We at the Martin Center, a political foundation associated with the European People's Party, attempt to come up with the right answers to the key policy challenges of our times and offer these answers to our leaders at both the national and the European level. We use different formats to achieve this goal. We provide our own research. We organize different forms of seminars, workshops, and conferences. The intention is always the same: to look for new and inspiring ideas, suggestions, and inspiration. This is also the aim of our European Ideas Forum 2021. For this edition of the European Ideas Forum, we have chosen 3 main topics: sustainable economic recovery after the pandemic, the future role of the EU in the great power competition, and digitalization. There is no doubt the primary current global challenge is represented by the COVID-19 pandemic. This challenge contains a number of dimensions. One of them is represented by the post-pandemic economic recovery. After the outbreak of the epidemic, the EU, but also the entire world, adopted a series of unprecedented measures aimed at saving jobs and ensuring entrepreneurs and families suffer as little as possible. Strict budgetary rules have been softened. The use of the European funds has been modified and expanded. And more importantly, an unprecedented decision has been taken to introduce the Recovery Fund, officially known as the Next Generation EU instrument. For the first time in the EU's history, the European Commission is eligible to emit common European bonds. It means to create common European liabilities in order to help overcome the negative consequences of the pandemic, especially in the most affected countries. Well, it is good news that we have been able to tune the different interests of those calling for massive spending and those labeled as the frugals. Now we all face the same challenge: to spend this money effectively and to undergo the process of fiscal consolidation in order to make EU economic recovery sustainable. So we look for the right answers on how to invest money from the Recovery Fund effectively, how to supervise this process, and in the end, how to cope with our significantly increased level of indebtedness. The icing on the cake is represented by conditionality between disbursement of the Recovery Fund and adherence to rule of law principles. The second topic of our conference is dedicated to the future of the EU in a time of a significant geopolitical shift, determined by the growing aggressiveness of both China and Russia, but also by the need to respond to global warming and other environmental challenges, by unstable neighbors bordering Europe, and the relentless pressure of immigration. We are going to discuss these issues in two panels. The first will be dedicated to Europe's role in the great power competition, while the second will explore the question of whether greater EU autonomy can make the EU more geopolitical, which is the ambition of the current Commission. There is no doubt these questions are not only very relevant, but also fundamentally important, not only due to the fact that China is becoming slowly but surely the largest economy in the world, and invests more and more into its military as well. Not only due to the fact that Russia is increasingly aggressive, but also due to the fact that the United States is gradually focused on Pacific and China more than on Europe. The new US administration, with President Biden at the helm, has brought a new tone into the transatlantic dialogue, returning to multilateralism. But the above-mentioned shifted emphasis from Europe to the Pacific is here to stay and will not change. EU institutions have been well aware of these new global geopolitical circumstances in the recent past. Therefore, the European Commission has adopted the EU Global Strategy for Foreign and Security Policy almost exactly 5 years ago, on June the 28th, 2016. This strategy defines strategic autonomy of the EU in these two fields, foreign policy and security. Something has been done since then in this respect, but there are still more questions than answers, to my mind. Why are we not able to speak in the area of foreign policy with one voice and swiftly enough? Why do China and Russia still successfully promote divide and rule tactics towards EU countries? Why are we so divided in various areas, including such a fundamental one, adherence to the rule of law principles? Why are populists and demagogues still so successful in our countries? Why do people have a feeling that the EU becomes less and less relevant globally? Why are we not able to sufficiently stabilize our European neighborhood? In the wake of the global strategy and subsequent documents, the European Commission prepared and published the White Paper on the Future of Europe, with 5 scenarios of the potential future state of the Union. The Commission wrote at that time, allow me brief quotation. Europe is at a crossroads and needs to decide how it wants to tackle the challenges of today. The debate on the future of Europe starts with the White Paper and ends with the European elections in 2019. We know no decision has been taken so far in this respect. We also know that Europe is at a crossroads and needs to adopt substantial reform. This is why the EU institutions have launched the Conference on the Future of Europe just a few weeks ago, on Europe Day. I believe our European Ideas Forum can contribute to our quest for the right answers on these difficult questions of our times. Last but not least, we are going to deal with digitalization. The COVID-19 pandemic has unveiled the huge potential of digitalization, including working effectively from our homes, connecting people from different corners of the globe online, and enabling people to create new jobs. But at the same time, reality has unveiled the weak points of the internet, social media, and the digital world as such. There is no doubt the future belongs to digitalization. But several questions need to be answered, and a number of dilemmas need to be solved. One of them is the contradiction between freedom of expression and freedom of access or availability on one side, and responsibility for the content, for spreading fake news, disinformation, hacking, and all relevant subsequent problems and difficulties on the other side. I am glad that one of our 4 panel discussions will explore the relationship between freedom and regulation in the sphere of digitalization. My dear friends, in addition to the 4 extremely timely and topical panel discussions, we will also enjoy 4 individual interventions or contributions. 2 of them will be provided in the form of an interview, and the other 2 as individual addresses. Today, we will watch and listen to an interview with the Eurogroup President and Irish Prime Minister, Irish Minister for Finance, maybe I predict a bit, Pascal Donohoe. And tomorrow, an interview will take place with the former European Council President, Polish Prime Minister, and current President of the European People's Party, Donald Tusk, followed by the keynote speech of the EPP Group Chairman, Manfred Weber. At the end of our conference, we will watch on and listen to Antonio Lopez Isturiz White, the EPP Secretary General, and the Martin Center Secretary Treasurer. I am very, very grateful to each of them for their willingness to share their insights with us today and tomorrow. Finally, I would like to thank all of our speakers, panel members, moderators of our panel discussions, but also all of you who have decided to join our event and our discussions. A special thank belongs to the sponsors of our event, AB InBev, Apple, and Qualcomm. Last but not least, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues from the Martin Center under the leadership of Margherita Movarelli for making this conference possible. I wish you all an inspiring event. Enjoy the debates and stay with us, the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies.
Thank you, President, for those inspiring and encouraging words. We will be back shortly with the first panel of the day. Stay with us. At this point, dear audience, I'd like to introduce to you our first topic for today, European Sustainable Economic Recovery. This time it's different. To provide our panelists with some input and data, I invite you to answer the following poll on slido.com with the event code EIF21. Should the Green Deal remain the EU's top priority in post-COVID Europe? We will have a look at the results halfway into our panel discussion. And now, I'd like to pass the floor to Dimitar Lilkov, Research Officer at the Martin Center, who will moderate the first debate. Dimitar, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. A warm welcome from the Martin Center and our European Ideas Forum. My name is Dimitar Lilkov, and I'll be moderating our today's panel on sustainable economic recovery. The goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 will require a fundamental change in many aspects of the European economic model. Especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments had to shift their immediate priorities. However, sustainability and climate change are certainly not off the radar. Of course, the challenge remains how to accommodate the specificities and the characteristics of certain industries and member states in achieving this transition. Our Martin Center panel today focuses on a successful economic sustainable recovery and which specific policies to put in place. In short, today we'll be talking about a successful Green Deal and a successful post-COVID recovery for the old continent. And what a lineup we have today in terms of experts. I'm really happy that today we're joined by high-profile professionals and policy makers. Our first guest is Commissioner Mairead McGuinness. She is the European Commissioner for Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union since 2020. Before that, Mrs. McGuinness was Ireland's longest-serving member of the European Parliament, starting in the early 2000s. She was also first Vice President of the European Parliament, part of Fine Gael and the EPP. Commissioner McGuinness, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
We are also joined by Esther de Lange, Member of the European Parliament and Vice Chair of the European People's Party. Mrs. de Lange is one of the most outspoken parliamentarians when it comes to topics related to sustainability, agriculture, and the European Green Deal, a long-serving friend of the Martin Center as well. Thank you for joining us, Esther.
It's great to be here and to see some people in real life. That's always a pleasure.
Next, on my right is Fleur Putz, Corporate Affairs Director for Europe at AB InBev, responsible for public affairs and the corporate social responsible agenda of the company. Previously, Fleur worked on trade policy, and she was also part of the political cabinet of a Belgian minister. Thank you, Fleur, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Last but not least, also connecting digitally is Ivo Belet, currently cabinet expert at the cabinet of Commissioner Dubravka Šuica. Ivo, before this position in the cabinet, Ivo served as a member of the European Parliament for 3 full mandates after an extensive career in journalism. Ivo, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dimitar. Thanks for the invitation, and it's an honor.
Before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. We will start the panel with very short kickoffs by each of the speakers. This is a live panel, so dear friends, feel free to tweet, post comments, answer our Slido question, and be as active as possible. So, let's kick it off. Commissioner McGuinness, the floor is yours for your opening statement.
Well, thank you again for allowing me to share some thoughts here today. And I'm going to be brief and to the point. I think it's interesting, the title of this panel, it's got a question mark after this time it's different. And I don't think there should be a question mark, because I think this time it really is different. If you look to the crisis that we are now trying to recover from, it arose because of a virus. It's global. We were not prepared for it. But we found that with this natural, if you like, event, both our societies and our economies and our businesses have really been hit very severely. So this is a new element to the crisis. The second, if you like, difference is that we are now very committed politically to achieving very ambitious targets around climate neutrality, but also targets around biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. So in fact, the scene is set for where the future needs to be, and therefore we need to direct all our energies towards a more sustainable recovery. Because I think if we were to waste this crisis, what would happen is we would pour money into the status quo. And I'm afraid the status quo is not sustainable. However, the change towards sustainability is huge. And therefore, we need not only to talk about the money behind it and what is required, but equally to talk about mindsets and making sure we leave no one behind. And I think if we get all of those elements together, we will have a sustainable economic recovery post-COVID. And what that will mean is that the changes we bring about through this more sustainable orientation will mean that we have long-term security. It will mean we will answer questions of a younger generation concerned about the future of the planet. What struck me in reading some information around the whole climate challenge is that we know, because the UN World Meteorological Organization has warned us, that there's a 40% chance that the yearly average global temperature could reach 1.5 degree level in at least one of the next 5 years. And there is a 90% probability that one of those next 5 years could be the warmest ever on record. So we know what the future holds if we do nothing. So what do we have to do? And very briefly, there isn't any sector of our society that will not be impacted by this transition. We can look at that as a challenge or an opportunity. And for me, what I would like to say to business, both large, small, and medium, is that this should be an opportunity to be sustainable for the long term. And those who don't get on this, if you like, train, won't have a future. So what it means is that in my role as the Commissioner responsible for financial stability is to make sure that we get money, private sector funds flowing towards sustainable investments. And to do that, we need to make sure that companies report on sustainability. So what are they doing? What are their plans? And that the financial industry has access to that information, but equally that the financial sector reports on what it's doing towards this sustainable agenda. So we've been putting together almost pieces of a very complicated but important puzzle, so that we bring together all the information that the market needs, and then we allow that market information to give investors choice around where they want to put their money. And at the heart of all of this is our EU taxonomy on sustainable economic activities. It classifies in a very specific way what is sustainable for the future. And I think that really today's discussion is about making sure that we bring people with us on this journey, that we acknowledge the concerns of businesses, struggling with the pandemic and looking towards a recovery, and that we ensure that they get the finance from it, whether that is through capital markets or through bank funding, and that they have a clear focus on what they need to do. If we put all of these pieces together, then the European Union not only will lead, but is leading in this field. We know the US is coming with us now, that there is a change of an administration. So in one sense, while the pandemic has been extremely difficult, perhaps in a way the changes in the geopolitical space, some good and some not so, allows us to show that the European Union is ready to change, is embracing it, but it's doing it not in a naive way. We're doing it around very strong fundamentals about our economy and our society. And I think we owe it to the next generation to put our economy and society on a firm and sustainable footing for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we're facing a puzzle which needs to accommodate different actors, and the role of the private sector is indeed extremely important. This is a point we'll come back to in discussion. First, I would like to give the floor to Esther for her kickoff.
Sure, and it seems that we were all triggered, or at least Mairead and I were both triggered by the question mark in the title. And let me give maybe my reply is this time it will have to be different, and for several reasons. The first reason is one that I don't only say as a politician, but also as a mother. We are the last generation that can fix this for our children. It's that simple, and therefore not acting is not an option. Then secondly, and this is very key for the EPP group in the European Parliament, is we want a Green Deal with a business case. So I think that your poll, I'm interested to see what your poll is going to find out, because there are those who say we've been through this crisis now, and now everything should be about economic recovery and no longer about the Green Deal, as if these two things are in opposition. they are not, and at least in the vision of the EPP group in the European Parliament, they should not be. If you can be green with a business case, it means that you have, the smart heads, but also the hardworking hands in Europe that can provide the goods and services of the future, these green and sustainable goods. So always not only the smartest kid in the class worldwide to be competitive, but also the most sustainable, the greenest, the most innovative. So this business case is very serious for us because we know that it won't work if we cannot attract private capital into this whole transition that we're making. And of course, we have to do our own homework as well, right? Our banking sector is not able yet to function perfectly, or it could function better. That means that certain pieces of legislation that are not all the way worked through, such as, for example, on the banking union, that will have to be done. So I'm also critical to my own my own tribe here, the politicians that have to get their act together. The third reason why I think that this time it will have to be different is because basically the European method, the European system is at stake here. You could see that when the crisis hit, there were immediately those worldwide that were saying, oh, look at how slow Europe is, or look at how much time it takes to, get 27 countries to move in the same direction, even on, for example, vaccines. We are now proving that, yes, we had a slow start, but it's actually functioning pretty well, and acting together as 27 makes us stronger. So this underlying fight between systems, what is the best economic system, what is the best societal system, is taking place, underneath this discussion that we're having about the Green Deal. And I would like the Green Deal to be the European way, not the Chinese, maybe not even the American way, although, they are becoming more and more our friends again, which is fantastic. But we should do it our way to prove that this system works. Maybe, I don't know if I dare, but let me draw a parallel to the European Championships that are taking place at the moment. And of course, the Dutch team was kicked out, deservedly so, by the Czechs. And of course, then you get a whole discussion about the trainer. Should he be fired? And how should we build back better? So, okay, the whole discussion is, are we going to go back to the football we had before this tournament, or are we actually firing the trainer in our in our situation and building something for the next tournament that is even better? And I think that is what Europe needs to do as well when it comes to this sustainable recovery. And in the meantime, the Dutch will be supporting the Belgians, of course. So let me leave it at that.
Is there still time, or are we already in extra time when it comes to the green transition?
Oh, we are, I think, in the 92nd minute, and I'm not kidding. This is why I started my intervention with the fact that we are the last generation that can still address this issue. Anything that we are not doing now will be harder for the next generation to fix. So I'm very serious here, but I also know that after this crisis, we have burdened this next generation with a huge amount of debt. And this is an elephant in the European room that nobody would like to address because it makes you unpopular to address it at this stage. I'm not saying we should return to fiscal discipline tomorrow, but I am saying that we should find a very smart and intelligent way to address the issue of debt in the future as Europeans.
Esther de Lange's key messages: we have to find Europe's way, and we're also deep in extra time. Floor. Let me give the floor to you. Ivo, I hope that you don't feel missed here, but the floor goes to Floor.
Thanks, Dimitar, for having me. Let me take maybe 1 minute to introduce our company, because maybe not all of you might be familiar with AB InBev, but I do hope that you know some of our beer brands like Stella Artois, Corona, or Budweiser. So we are the world's largest brewer. 1 beer out of 4 worldwide is brewed by one of my passionate colleagues, and at the same time we are rooted very much in Europe, right? So our brewing history goes back 600 years to Leuven, just outside Brussels, where we're still headquartered today, listed on Euronext, and some of our global colleagues are working in Leuven. So very big global footprint, but at the same time anchored locally, right? So we try to source locally, we brew locally, we sell locally, we pay our taxes locally, and we even keep our IP for our brands locally, unlike many other multinationals or maybe tech companies do. So it's an amazing footprint, right? We are very global, but locally anchored, and especially in the area of sustainability, that is very relevant, right? And that brings me to my opening statement, which I wanted to make, and bringing the company perspective here. We are very strong believers, and maybe also proof of the fact that economic recovery, growth, can go hand in hand with an ambitious sustainability agenda. Right, so we've been growing both in terms of volume and value over the last couple of years, COVID year accepted, steadily. And at the same time, we are making huge progress in our sustainability targets, right? I'm just thinking about our emission cuts. For instance, we have been brewing more and more beer, but we've been cutting our emissions in 3 years' time with 25%, right? So we're very proud of that. And that's a little bit the message that I want to convey. And also coming back to the business case and the mindset of the commissioner, we really want to convey the message that sustainability must be seen as a growth opportunity. Right? It's a business opportunity. And to understand that better, we really want to inform other companies and businesses in general to make the right choices, right? If we look at how we can grow, we need to look at the consumers, right? They're the ones who are providing growth. We go where the consumer goes, and the consumer is telling us at the moment that they're looking for more purpose, especially post-COVID. They are wanting sustainable choices. They want to purchase from companies who make the sustainable choices. And the same goes for investors, right? The commissioner was just referring to the taxonomy piece, will be hugely important. And a third reason why companies should look at sustainability as an opportunity, it's because it really is a business case, right? At this moment, we are, for instance, looking at our ETS bill, which comes in every year. We pay for the emissions that we emit, rightfully so. And that bill helps us to make the business case whether or not to buy a new boiler for our breweries, right? If the boiler, let's say, costs $1 million, but in 2 years' time, we will save $1 million in emission rights. It's a no-brainer. The business case is made. However, in order to be able to make all these sustainability decisions, companies need to be able to invest, right? And that's where I believe decision makers come in there to safeguard this the investment space in Europe.
Safeguarding the investment space, also a topic we'll come back to in our discussion. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Ivo, who also has vast previous experience in dealing with these issues. So I'm really curious to hear your views.
Thanks very much, Dimitar, and thanks for the invitation that I accepted on behalf of Vice President of the European Commission, Dubravka Šuica. And since we last met at the forum in Paris, I don't know if you remember, it was referred to in the introductory video, and I have very good remembrances of that event. A lot has happened, of course. That was like 3 years ago, and the context, as the Commissioner and Esther de Lange already and Fleur indicated, the context has changed considerably. So we're in a different world now. And at the time, Fleur just referred to the ETS. And at the time, 3 years ago, not longer ago, we were working on a very complicated reform of the ETS system, of the European emission trading system, because it was on the verge of collapse after the financial crisis. And to make a long story short, you know what happened. The European Commission took some measures. The market stability reserve had been implemented. I don't want to go too technical, but we saved the ETS from collapse. and we're ready to reform it further in the upcoming weeks even. So, and the 14th of July is indeed a very important date in this respect. Let me say a few words about the introductory question that the previous speakers already referred to. Will it be different this time? And I don't want to repeat what the other speakers have said, but it will be different because also of the amplitude of the whole operation, because of the amplitude of the investment of the Resilience and Recovery Fund, the Next Generation EU, of 750 billion euros that will be invested. This is a huge difference compared to previous periods. And this money, of course, will have to be invested in, you already referred to, Dimitar, to digitalization. This will have to be invested by member states in digitalization and in green measures. So at least, as we all know, at least 37% of investment has to go to projects that contribute to our European Green Deal, and 20% must go to digitalization. And based on the plans that are that have been tabled and are planned and now tabled by the member states, we see that quite a number of plans are even more ambitious, go beyond these numbers that are that are part of the recovery fund. So this is really positive, and we are talking about very concrete, very tangible projects. We are talking about cross-border projects on renewable hydrogen. We are talking about wind and solar. We're talking about clean transport. So very tangible project for the citizens. And if I may, Dimitar, if you allow me to say one more element, this is not just about industry. This is not just about sustainable energy generation. This is also about citizens, as Commissioner McGuinness said. Let's bring people together with us on this journey, and this is exactly what we want to do. Allow me to refer and to use one sentence to refer to the upcoming strategy, the long-term vision on rural areas, which the College of Commissioners hopefully will endorse tomorrow. So, and that exactly is one of the main purposes, one of the main objectives of the whole investment plan, is to leave indeed anyone behind. And this means that the investment measures, not only the investment measures, but that the legislative package will have to go together with accompanying measures to make sure that the huge impact that these transitions will have on citizens will have to be compensated by accompanying measures on the social level. And last but not different, it will be different, Dimitar, because, and I refer to Esther de Lange, the European Parliament will have a major role in the whole process. It's not for me to say this, but this is a big difference also compared to previous operations. So the European Parliament will, without any doubt, keep the member states and the Commission accountable for the monitoring of the national reform plans, and that structural, that systemic exchange between the institutions with the European Parliament in a primary role will guarantee a successful implementation of this recovery and resilience plan. Back to you, Dimitar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your concise opening. Commissioner McGuinness, I want to turn back to you. I know that you're also pressed for time and that you need to leave a bit earlier. You mentioned the sustainable finance taxonomy of which you're in charge of. Let's talk about some of the potential problems as well. Within the taxonomy, we saw that there's some divisions when it comes to labeling gas and nuclear, whether they're green or transit investment, and this decision was postponed for a later stage. How can we overcome such divisions, and does this clash on the green taxonomy remind us that certain geographical boundaries and certain geographical divisions will be problematic in the long run?
Look, thank you for the question. In my view, politics is about difference. It's about finding solutions to the differences that we have, but you can't have political debate without people coming to the table with different perspectives, or indeed, as you indicate, that some member states are at a different point in the journey towards sustainability. So I'm not troubled by the fact that we have very challenging issues to deal with, but I think it's important to say that we already have a draft delegated act on the table. which doesn't include the sectors you mentioned, but deals with a huge number of other sectors, from forestry to aluminium to construction to insurance. And this is a global first. So Europe is the first to publish a green taxonomy, which gives an indication of what is sustainable, but also gives companies the capacity to see how they can plan a journey towards sustainability. To deal then with your question about the difficult issues around some energy choices, clearly, technology neutrality is a core for the Commission, but there are many different views around both gas and nuclear in this movement towards sustainability. We will be charged in the coming weeks to deal with those sensitive issues and include agriculture in the taxonomy as well. And we will do that in consultation with our platform on sustainable finance, the experts who give us very important feedback. We consult with member states, we consult with the European Parliament, and we do it in the European way, which Esther de Lange has referenced. And the European way is not where we all come to the table and agree wholeheartedly about everything. No, not at all. The European way means that people come to the table with very different perspectives, but that we find a solution that at least allows us move forward together. And I don't underestimate the challenge of that, but I do not think we have any choice but to deal with those challenges in a mature way where we look at the evidence and the information, we look at what is politically acceptable. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges for us in all of this, and I think we've all referenced it, is to get people with us on this journey. So not to force either individuals or companies, not to tell them what to do, but to show people the way towards a more sustainable future for our economy and our society. So in my view, dealing with difference is what I've always done as a politician from the early 2000s right up to my role here in the European Commission. And what makes Europe work is dialogue and openness to compromise and find a solution and find a way forward. And with the delegated act that's on the table for the co-legislators at the moment, of course, there are many different views on it. And my perspective on what we already have proposed is that because it is a global first, it gives certainty to the industries that it impacts and to the financial sector about information that allows them make good decisions around sustainability. And we will come with a future delegated act on those areas where there is not agreement, but where we will have to find an agreement. And that's what we are charged to do, whether we're a member of Parliament, a member of the Commission, a member of society. And it's only in the European way that we will make progress. And I think Esther was very right to say that in the beginning of this pandemic, I mean, there were real difficulties across Europe until Europe realized that we were stronger together, whether that was around protective equipment or around vaccination. And on vaccination, can I just say that we are the only global players that not only looked after ourselves, but actually we exported and we supplied vaccines to 90 countries globally, which I think speaks of a European spirit that is not inward looking, but is outward looking, and a European spirit which recognises that we've had the benefits of development and the costs are now climate change, and we recognise we need to lead and show more leadership in this area. So I never worry about differences. I worry when we can't agree, where people leave the table without agreement, but I have a capacity to keep people around the table until we reach an agreement.
Very brief follow-up on the outlook, on the outward outlook you just mentioned. The sustainable taxonomy is a first. Do you think that this could serve as a model for other countries globally to follow and to replicate Europe's framework?
Yeah, I think your question about the global issue is really, really important, because Europe doesn't want to go it alone, because alone we cannot make the big changes that the planet needs, the global needs, if you like. So we've worked with an international platform on sustainable finance. The Commission set this up with the very, if you like, aim of getting global partners around the table. And there are many now around the table. We hope the US will join. And the idea is that while we have very high ambitions and we have a path towards sustainability, we want to make sure that there are global standards. And the global standards shouldn't be, if you like, the limit of our ambition, but they should be the floor, the very foundations of what we try to do, so that different jurisdictions, depending on where they are in a development phase, can work from that global standard. And I'm quite confident that this global, if you like, agreement can work better with the current climate, because you have many global players now accepting that what the Paris Agreement says is what we need to do, and therefore that we will all be looking to one another to make sure that we say that we will achieve what we've set out. And because Europe is leading, we need to continue that leadership, but we want to do it in the global context. And look, we may be looking at other big issues like accounting rules and all of these things that the financial system at the moment have, because what we've done up to now is we've separated, if you like, finance and economics from the natural world. I think the pandemic has shown that the natural world, if you like, seeps into our economies, our businesses when it goes wrong, when the virus hit, and it hit our health and our society, but it hit our industries and our businesses. And I think there's now a better understanding that you cannot really have an economy that doesn't take account of things that are happening in the natural world, whether it's climate or environmental degradation. So what we're looking at here is a global, holistic approach to a sustainable future. And as Esther said, I think her child is younger than my children, but we all see that we want to develop a future for our children, for their sake, rather than just for it to be done. It is the right thing to do, and we just need to make sure that we do the right thing and achieve sustainability.
Thank you very much, Commissioner McGuinness. I appreciate, because I know that you're also pressed for time. Esther, we just talked about the global aspect. Now let's maybe zoom into Europe.
Okay.
The European Commission and national capitals are quite busy drafting and going through the recovery plans, correct? Going through these ambitions, going through these plans, do you think that our ambition is sufficient when it comes to potentially allocated funding? Do we need something else in order to achieve these goals?
Well, that depends on how you look at it. If you only look at the public funding, the answer is very clear. That is not enough to achieve this transition. And this is why I underlined also the need for public finance, for private money, to flow into this project. And that's why Mairead McGuinness's taxonomy is so important. I'm not saying it's easy, Mairead, because indeed there are different opinions on this matter, but it allows, well, let me take a step back. I have the impression that on the taxonomy, often the industry is already further advanced sometimes than the discussions, and I see Mairead nodding, the discussions that we are having as politicians. Because if you speak to investment funds or insurance companies or people that need to invest on their company's behalf, they want guidance. They want clarity that if they invest over a long period of time, they want this investment to be green today, but also still in 5 years and in 10 years. And I know you're forcing me to go to the European level only, but I want to make a step to the global level as well, because I do think compared to the previous administration in the White House, the current Biden administration is very interested in what's happening in the European Union, and in a way that might actually be more dangerous, can I say that? Because the Trump administration was basically looking at us saying, what are the silly Europeans doing? But the Biden administration often is looking at us saying, this is very interesting. There is jobs in there. There's investment in there. Maybe we should copy paste and beat them at their own game. So we need to be awake here. We're on to something good if we do it in the right way. Let's make sure that Europe keeps this leading role. So that's why the importance of both the public money and the private investments are so key. And turning back to the RRF, to the national plans also that are being submitted by all the member states, some of which, by the way, Mairead, are thousands and thousands of pages if you look into them. What I think is really good is that really there's this focus on digital. There is this focus on sustainability and the Green Deal with the business case. And there have been talks with the European Commission, and things that were not up to scratch have been improved. And I really think there's another strength of this European system. Of course, the European Parliament will continue to have a sharp eye on the European Commission to make sure that these national plans that get approved by the Commission are all up to scratch. So together with my colleague, for example, Siegfried Muresan from the EPP, we're keeping a sharp eye on the Commission still.
Thank you. Before we continue the discussion, let's see what's happening online with our Slido poll and potential questions. Anna, give us an update.
Thank you, Dimitar. Indeed, we do have the results from our Slido poll. Over 50% of our participants, of our online viewers, so close to 60, think indeed that the Green Deal should be one of the key priorities of the European Union, but not the only one, so along with other key priorities. So I think that's definitely some food for thought here. We also have 2 questions from our online viewers, which maybe partially have been answered already, but you can build on them. So the first one is, what specific measures can we implement to ensure post-pandemic recovery is inclusive and covers each generation of European citizens? And the second one is, should the Recovery and Resilience Facility become a permanent instrument in the future? So Dimitar, the floor is yours.
Great questions. Okay, I see the commissioner is still with us, so I would like to make use of her time and give her the second question. Should the RFF be a permanent instrument in the future? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to say that that isn't the question for now. For me, the question now is what Esther referred to, that we need to make sure that the RRF delivers on what we need it to deliver. And that's why there has been real scrutiny of national plans. There's been a lot of discussion between member states and the Commission. And it's why we value the fact that the Parliament will continue to scrutinise, because this was billed as a once-off because of the severity of the pandemic and its economic consequences. But it also showed that in times that are unique and different, because as we said, this time is different, there was a need for a much bigger, bolder response. But I think we now need to make sure that that response delivers on this big objectives that we've set ourselves, a recovery that is sustainable. So when Esther, rightly points to an eye being kept on the Commission in terms of the RRF, I would equally say that we welcome that in the Commission, because it strengthens our arm to make sure that the member states who have very strong and elaborate plans for the recovery, who will get both grant aid and loans, or both, that they put them to the use that's on the plan, and that we have these milestones and targets. So, I mean, this is a first, and with every first, there are, concerns about what will come of it. Will it mean more for the future? I think it's always better to focus on the here and now, and to make sure that what we have in terms of this next generation EU, that it translates into a stronger, more resilient, more inclusive European society and economy. And let's talk afterwards about what we might need to do, because there will be time for that conversation. Let's focus now on immediate results.
Thank you very much. And the first question, I think, Ivo, this goes to you. What specific measures can be taken in order to make the green transition more inclusive? And I'm directing the question to you because I know that you're also involved with the Future of Europe conference as well, and how to bring more citizens involved. So what do you think about inclusiveness?
Thanks, Dimitar, and thanks for addressing that issue, because that exactly is one of the main lines, one of the horizontal objectives of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And I'm very glad that you raised it, because the President also referred to it in his introductory speech to this seminar. And we want to thank him for that very much, because he really invited the participants also of this forum and of the Martin Center and everyone who is participating in this seminar, in this webinar, to come on board of that Conference on the Future of Europe that was launched a few weeks ago. The inaugural plenary, where Commissioner McGuinness and also MEP De Lange participated, took place in Strasbourg a few weeks ago. And according to myself, to my humble opinion, but I'm deep into this process, of course, it is an innovative process where indeed citizens are at the heart of the whole process. Not only citizens, also civil society. And Fleur will agree with me that also Business Europe is at the heart of this process, of this conference on the future of Europe. Civil society has a central role to play, not only the trade unions, but also Business Europe. So, and this is exactly what we want to trigger, is to have that debate on the future of Europe. And you referred to, in the Slido questions, you referred to, the participants referred to, of course, the importance of the recovery, of a speedy and effective recovery. But when you go to the digital platform of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which has been launched a few weeks ago, as said, and which is operational now and up and running, you can see that not only the recovery, but also health health, as the Commissioner has been referring to, security, migration, and also democracy are really at the heart of concerns of citizens, civil society, and all stakeholders. So when we talk about resilience, it's not just a matter of economy, but it's also a matter of democracy, how to make our democratic institutions also on the European level more resilient to cope with the challenges of today. And the best way to do this is to bring people on board, to bring civil society on board, to bring Business Europe on board in order to have the discussion that we want to finalize by spring 2022 under the French presidency of the European Union, which is very soon and very quick. So I invite all participants and also the forum, the Wilfried Martens Center, to come on board and to assist us to contribute on this debate on the future of Europe. Back to you, Dimitar.
Thank you, Ivo, and a message to all of you: join the Future of Europe debate. Now, I'd like to turn to Flora, because right in the last couple of minutes, we mentioned the private sector a lot, expectations, realities. Maybe tell us a bit more of InBev's experience during and after the pandemic, and also how can the private sector be encouraged to be actively involved in the green transition? When it comes to specific policies, how can the public sector help the private sector?
Thank you. That's the 1 billion question,
Yeah.
right? And I think we all need to work together, both industry, citizens, right? To Ivo's point, citizens play a huge role, right? They indicate the direction both of policymakers and of industry, right? They have a very powerful voice in this debate, but also policymakers and industry need to work together. And if you're asking me what we additionally need at this point as a large industry, we would need from policymakers, first of all, a level playing field. We need from policymakers the time for recovery, very important, right? And especially in our sector, the beer sector and HoReCa in general is very badly hit by COVID. We need to fix our balance sheets. We need to help the 900,000 SMEs who lost their job due to COVID in the hospitality sector. So the recovery fund budget, we need to make sure that that really reaches those smaller enterprises who are there. And then what we ask the policymakers in the light of sustainability, maybe something very concrete, is to greenify our tax system, right? As a company, we see very much that tax is a huge driver, right, when we make our decisions. And we see loads of opportunity to modernize the tax system there. I was just understanding from my procurement colleagues that we pay the exact amount of excess duties on our energy bill when it comes to green electricity and grey electricity. But how is that still possible? How is it possible that we pay the same fees for a polluting energy product compared to green energy? So this needs modernization in order for us to facilitate for us certain investment decisions to go towards green electricity, for instance. Because we do feel that we are making, for instance, the choice. Now all our beers in Western Europe as of next year will be brewed with green electricity. But we feel that we are not being helped by policymakers in that area, but many others as well. For instance, when it comes to packaging, recycled content in packaging, etc.
I just want to repeat, close to 1 million people in the hospitality sector lost their jobs in the last year and a half, correct?
Yeah, correct. And it's not...
This is startling.
Yeah, and it's not it's not the most resilient jobs that were lost, right? We are talking about a huge percentage of female, unschooled, flexible jobs that need to be now filled again. So again, it's hugely important that support from member states, from the European Union, is really getting to those who really need it badly.
Esther, this is also an extremely important topic. While we implement reforms or when we become really ambitious in Europe, what does it mean for our global competitiveness? Many people are saying that we're going to lose out in the future, especially bearing in mind crazy competition coming from the East and Asia specifically. What to do about global competitiveness, bearing in mind our really ambitious agenda?
Yeah, the biggest, the biggest strength is, of course, to invest in your own competitiveness, right? That is, of course, the first thing you need to do. But then secondly, and I heard the message about the level playing field, and this is something that the EPP has heard loud and clear. This is something that we're always pushing for, and this is not a matter of protectionism, but it's a matter of leveling out something that is not level. Hence the proposal that we are expecting in the context of this Green Deal for a carbon border adjustment mechanism for a number of sectors, which really just evens out the fact that in other parts of the world there is no such price attached to CO2 emissions as we have in Europe. And Ivo Belet was referring to the ETS, Fleur. Basically, it's Ivo's fault that you're now paying 55 euros per ton of CO2 emitted and not 5, because indeed he was responsible in the parliament for fixing that system. But it was the right thing to do, because it gives the people who make your investment decisions the right stimulus to go like, okay, it needs to be cleaner because we will save money. Can I also say something about the taxation? Because that, I think, was also a very valid issue. Of course, when I hear the T word as a European politician, I'm always a bit careful, because taxation systems are, of course, decided at national level. But one of the most important things that were mentioned was the issue of energy taxation. And that is something that the Commission will review, where we do have powers and where we are now in the weird situation that the greener equivalent is not only the same price, but it's actually more expensive. Because we're not taxing the carbon content, but we're actually, or the energy content, but we are taxing the amount that you need. So this is one of our priorities, to level that out, to make that fairer. So yes, it's a global game as well, and we need to protect ourselves or level the playing field where it needs leveling. But I think also my remark regarding the United States is very valid. I have the impression that, yes, the Americans are now on our side, but we should be careful that they're not going to beat us at our own game. And maybe on other issues where it's hard to find a global consensus, think about ETS for aviation. Never an easy topic worldwide. If we can't immediately go global, why don't we start transatlantic? A huge number of flights are transatlantic. Can we do, something that is more ambitious than CORSIA, that is something like the EU ETS, together with the Americans? I see also a lot of opportunities at a global level.
Here, I would like to pick your brains a bit. Esther and Ivo, you're seasoned MEPs involved in numerous files and negotiations. The thing which Esther mentioned just now, let's say pushing transatlantic flights to the ETS and also the border adjustment mechanism, basically making sure that third countries who do not have their own Green Deal in place, they need to be charged a specific levy at the border for goods coming in Europe. Wouldn't this be problematic on the trade front? Isn't this something which can open up trade wars in the future? Question to both Esther and Ivo about the European border mechanism, carbon mechanism. Ivo, thoughts on that?
Go ahead.
Yes, I can come in briefly. Of course, this is the right timing to have this debate, and even perhaps a little bit not premature, but you're on top of it, and you're so much on top of it, Dimitar, with this webinar, that it's difficult and delicate to react, because and Commissioner McGuinness referred to it, in less than 2 weeks, on the 14th of July, the European Commission will decide, most probably, on the whole package of Fit for 55, including reform of the ETS system, making it even more ambitious, and on the CBAM, on the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is in the pipeline and which should be decided upon then. So I don't know, I do know, but I can't go into detail of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. But what I can say is, what Esther already referred to, is that CBAM won't be, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism won't be the panacea for all the challenges that we are confronted with on an international level, but at least it will be an incentive for partners in third countries to come on board with whether a tax or whether in the ETS system on their own, it will oblige them to come on board. And of course, CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, will have to be WTO compatible, otherwise it won't fly. And let me add one more element on ETS, because referring to what Esther de Lange said in the previous period in the Parliament, and if I'm not mistaken, she was playing also not that a minor role in the reform of ETS, just to underline, and also for Fleur, that the current ETS system, and also in the past, but certainly the current system, is market-driven on the one hand, and also the other principle, one of the pillars of ETS is also, and this is very positive for our industry, is that it has a benchmark philosophy, meaning that the best performers are rewarded. So when you have a reformed ETS, market-driven, combined with an effective carbon border adjustment mechanism, combined also with a lot of investments, I forgot to underline that, a lot of investments in R&D. The current Horizon Europe program is meant to have an investment of 95 billion euros in the upcoming 7 years to make our economy more innovative and more resilient from an innovation point of view. So let's not forget about that too. Back to you, Dimitar.
Thanks, Esther. I was unsuccessful in getting internal information from Ivo on this, but your thoughts as a politician on the border mechanism?
Well, I can imagine that for the Commission, they only have one shot to get this right. Because the eyes of the world are on them. What they're trying to do here, I mean, here the Americans are very outspoken, right? They travel around the world saying this CBAM thing that Europe is cooking up, that's not a good idea, it has to disappear. So we have one shot in getting this right, and therefore, as Ivo said, it has to be WTO compatible. And this will be a big fight, you know, what is the relationship with the free allowances that are currently in the ETS for industry, for energy? It will be, that is my view, but of course we will have to wait 2 weeks to see the final proposal, but it will be a matter of phasing free allowances out while phasing CBAM in. The EPP is fighting very hard not to have an immediate disappearance, like some political groups want, of these free allowances, because that would actually mean that the playing field becomes even less level, that you have kind of a dip when you introduce a new system like CBAM. That we don't want to happen. We want the level of protection or the level playing field situation to at least stay the same while we introduce this new system of CBAM. But we have to be careful. It has to be WTO compatible, and it will do two things. It will either make sure that there will be a calculation made at the border, and those who pay less for carbon in their own region will have to pay. Or those regions will realize that it's easier to also have a cap-and-trade system or a system that puts a fair price on CO2. I don't care what is the outcome, because the result for industry and for companies in Europe will be the same, and that's why we're doing this exercise.
We're getting closer to the end of our panel, but before we close, Floor, on the whole question of competitiveness in Europe in the global context, I mean, you represent a European company. In a nutshell, what are the biggest challenges you face from your competitors, and how can Europe keep its competitive vision and role globally in the next decade or so?
So we are a global company,
yep,
as well as a European company, and that allows us to give an interesting perspective, right? And that really allows us to valorize Europe's initiatives very, very much so. So we know that our colleagues in the US, but also outside the US, our Chinese colleagues, our colleagues in South America and even Africa, are looking at what Europe is doing. They are looking at Europe as the example. They call us and say, what's happening with plastics? Is Europe is taxing plastics? Is this the beginning of a trend? Will this come to us? Can you explain to us how that works? Right? And this allows this global view helps our company to be ahead of, to be a front runner in this area of sustainability, and I believe that's why it's important that Europe remains playing that role as front runner on the policy scene as well.
Can I ask you a question to Floor? Yeah, because
Quick
there's
one.
very quick one. There's also this debate about labeling, sustainable products in
PEF.
terms of in terms of their carbon performance. That is top down. Is that a good thing or a bad thing from your perspective?
We're all looking at it.
Yeah.
We applaud a PEF system for at least so our consumers know what is environmentally friendly and what is not, right? Because now they cannot see, there's just too much guidance from them. We want to inform our consumers in a correct way. And if I think about PEF and how it will be implemented, one important thing that I would recommend policymakers is to align it with, for instance, international reporting standards. So we put in we don't make it too burdensome for the companies, and to be able to implement it quick, right? But definitely a fan, and our global colleagues around the world are monitoring PEF developments closely as well.
Okay. Thanks.
I think we can continue this debate for hours on end, but here we must pause and finish this panel. I think that we heard a couple of extremely important messages from our panelists. Economic recovery and growth can actually go hand in hand with a sustainable agenda. Sustainability actually has a business case, and this is extremely important. Europe is in a privileged position to push the global debate and influence other countries on sustainability. And we also had a fantastic pledge by all speakers that this time it will be different. Floor, Esther, Ivo, Commissioner McGuinness, thank you very much for this panel. Thank you to our audience, and back to you, Anna, for our second panel.
Thank you, Dimitar. This was such a great debate. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for a virtual coffee break, and we will see each other again in 15 minutes for our next discussion. Tune in at 17. Dear audience, welcome back. A friendly reminder that you can also join the debate on social media with the hashtag EIF21. Our next discussion will be about Europe's role in the great power competition. And before diving into the topic with our experts, I invite you to answer the following Slido poll with the code EIF21. In today's great power competition, Europe's place is... To tackle this and other points, I'd like to introduce Roland Freudenstein, Policy Director of the Martin Center, who will moderate the upcoming panel. Roland, over to you.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome also from my own side. So I'm Roland Freudenstein, the Policy Director of the Martin Center, and I'm happy to have with me in the studio here Roberta Metsola, from Malta, member of the European Parliament, actually Vice President of the European Parliament, and member of the EPP group there. Online, we have Alexander Stubb, who is the director of the School of Transnational Governance of the European University Institute in Florence currently, but also a former member of the European Parliament, and last but by no means least, a former Finnish Prime Minister. We also have Margareta Cederfelt from Sweden, a member of the Swedish Parliament, the Riksdag, and Vice President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and President of the EPP group there. Further, we have Noah Barkin from the United States, Senior Visiting Fellow of the Asia Program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and with the Rhodium Group, an expert in especially the Euro-Chinese relationship. When I was preparing for this, I was tempted to strike a note of modesty, but then I thought better of it. Let's start with a bit of bombast here, and for that I am going to read you a quote from 2009 of Mark Leonard. Mark Leonard, the founder of the European Council of Foreign Relations, in his book, What Does China Think? And he starts out the book with the following lines. Very few things that happened during my lifetime will be remembered after I'm dead. Even 9/11 or the Iraq War, and seen from today, he might as well have added the corona pandemic. So all these things will gradually fade until they become mere footnotes in the history books. But China's rise is different. It is the big story of our age, and its after effects could echo down generations to come. Now, you must admit, this is quite an entry into our topic, but actually, while we do want to focus on Europe, America, China, democracies, and so on, I would like to take a step back and start actually with transatlantic relations, because, the rise of China may be the big strategic story of our age, but the immediate news of the last couple of months actually was the improvement in transatlantic relations. And I would actually like to kick off with Alexander Stubb and ask him, when I looked at some of your speeches and lectures on YouTube, you used to speak of a power vacuum in the last couple of years. And power vacuum, especially when talking about defending the global liberal order. So with Joe Biden in the White House, is that vacuum being filled again? Is the West back, so to speak? Over to you, Alexander.
Thanks a lot, Roland, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm actually catching you from the Finnish archipelago, which Roberta will know well, here in Porkkala, which we had to give to the Soviet Union after World War II for rental and got it back in 1956. And we're now happily hanging out here with plus 28 degrees and sunshine, as we often do here in Finland. To give you a direct answer is yes and no. Let me put it this way. I think that at this particular moment, we have moved from a world of disorder and power vacuums to three clear power blocks. Number one, China. Number two, the United States. And number three, the European Union. All of these three blocks are different in character. Obviously, the United States and Europe are both democracies, but the United States is by definition a state, whereas the European Union is more than an international organization, but less than a state. China is centralized politically, but decentralized economically. It does not believe in traditional democracy. And these three power blocks are going to be the big deciders. And if I were to give you my 2 cents at the moment, is to say that we basically have three different options with dealing with China. Number one is to disconnect completely. This is, if I may exaggerate, the American way at the moment. The US sees China as its number one enemy. It's not a new Cold War, but the situation is similar. You need an enemy to rally around the flag back home. The second option is to connect fully, both politically and economically, and say that, you know, we don't have a problem with Chinese human rights or fundamental rights. We're going to go full China, forget the United States. The third one is to try to find a balance between these two. And this is what I would advocate. I think Europe should be what I call the great stabilizer between China and the United States. And for me, a great stabilizer means that it is 75% with the United States because of our value base, because of our culture, because of our history, because of our economic ties. But at the same time, if it wants to be seriously geopolitical, it has to play with China. We cannot close the door from China. So my take here, Roland, is power vacuums are being filled as we speak. Europe should be the great stabilizer between China and the United States, but tilt a little bit more with our good old friends in the US.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I mean, this is basically the answer 3 in the Slido poll that we offered, and I'm asking you, the audience, to please participate in it.
It was a really good point 3, and I hope the audience goes for it.
And we will see about that. You know, my hopes are actually with the answer number 1, but just to remind you all, it's so in today's great power competition, Europe's place is A, firmly at the side of the US and the other democracies of the world, B, as an independent third force outside the US-China rivalry, and C, it's complicated, politically with the US, but economically, concerning trade, investment, technology, independent. I might have added a fourth option, of course, like siding completely with China, but I have the impression that while before the pandemic some people were advocating this in Europe, this has become rather rare because, you know, not only in the US, but also in Europe, there is a sizable shift going on in the mood vis-a-vis China and the mood on Euro-Chinese relations. But I would still, Alexander, forgive me, I would come back to this initial question. Is the transatlantic relationship back?
Yes, definitely.
So the answer is
definitely.
Yes.
I mean, you know, yeah. Resoundingly. I mean, we're back to it. But remember that we have to play the power game here. We do not know whether Donald Trump or Joe Biden is a footnote in history. We should not exclude the possibility of another populist leader emerging, nativist leader in the United States, which means we need to find the balance between the Atlantic relationships, strategic autonomy, taking more ability. With Joe Biden for the next 4 years, really back.
Absolutely understood. But what if Europe, through its own actions in the next 2 years, maybe, can actually help a Bidenist approach, even in the future, with a possible successor administration to the current one? You know, maybe that's a point where we can really get together in saying that, look, yes, we need to prepare for all possibilities, but Europe is not a bystander. Europe can today create facts that will make it harder in the future to decouple the US from Europe. Wouldn't that be an idea? Okay.
Yes, but we of course would not like to with US elections as such. So what I'm trying to say is that we should not take for granted that Joe Sixpack on the street cares about the European Union in any which way. We should be conscious of the fact that administrations do, and administrations have a certain approach. The Biden administration is an international, liberalist, globalist, multilateral administration. But what I'm saying is that on the Republican side, it's a complete mess at this moment, and we cannot trust whichever Republican president might be the one that follows after Biden or Harris or whoever that might be. So be conscious.
Okay, let me turn to Margareta Cederfeld and to the eminent question of a global struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. I mean, this has been emphasized more and more intensively in recent years, and I think it was Joe Biden a year before actually the beginning of his administration, when he was still campaigning, who actually emphasized this difference and said the big conflict of our age is actually the one between these two antagonistic political systems. So my question to you is it right to frame the overarching international confrontation as one between democracy and authoritarianism, or aren't we risking a kind of new global Cold War? And it's not only the Russian and the Chinese leadership that seem to be warning about this global new Cold War, but also Chancellor Merkel recently. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, if I'm sitting here in Vienna in a hotel room. It's warm and outside and the sun is shining, but here I am, and I'm sad if the picture is not that good in the background, but that's the hotel room. Yes, I would like to say that, of course, there is a conflict between democracy and totalitarianism, and we can't go behind that. But if I look from the OSCE perspective, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, we are working with the security perspective in a very broad perspective. And I think that that's one important thing to secure peace, to secure freedom, fundamental freedom, to secure democracy. It's also to include a peace perspective. But back to democracy, conflict, totalitarianism, I think this is a true conflict, because the two systems can't exist at the same time. I am that old that I remember very well the former Soviet Union, and I remember, as I'm born in Sweden, in the southern part, I remember those who flew from Balticum, from Poland, and to Sweden, to the free Europe. And I think we have, as European, we have to defend democracy, and we have to work for the rule-based world to secure the fundamental freedoms, because if we don't do it, who should then do it? And we need to seek friends to cooperate with, like the transatlantic link. I think that's also very important. Nobody can stand alone and do everything alone. Just like a single European country, we have gone together with the 27 member countries in the European Union, but European Union do also need to get friends to find partners to work together with. And there is US, there is Canada, to mention two important countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. On this occasion, let me come to the essay that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov just published in Kommersant in Russian and I think the Russia Daily or so in English that just came out yesterday. In which he precisely says that the rules-based international order, as postulated by the West currently, means just the rule of the West and not the rule of law as he understands it. And he very clearly also puts Russia and China ahead of a kind of global movement towards more equality between nations. He postulates also the end of the Western civilization as a decisive one. It says, come on, guys, get used to it. You know, that you ruled the world for 500 years. The party is over. And how would you comment this kind of talk about the past and the future? Because I think every political conflict, every serious political disagreement is always about who owns the future and who is stuck in the past. And he automatically, of course, he uses this pattern. How would you comment upon this past-future thing?
Yes, the past-future, it's a very interesting topic. But when I hear political leaders talk about, yes, we want to have democracy, but not in the European way. We want to have it in our way. And when I ask them, what is your way? I haven't found any, what shall I say, trustable reply, because it's always something that we need to secure, that it's a safe life for our citizens, that they don't get offended and so on. But then who should decide about this? It does never include this perspective with democracy or rule-based order in our way, or the fundamental freedoms in our way. I haven't found any system worldwide that really secure the fundamental freedom or democracy for the citizens, for the people, when they speak about make it our way. Because what do they want? What does this mean? Is it in opposition against the rule-based world? Is it against one person, one voice? Is it against, or is it with free media, free gathering, freedom of speech, etc.? I haven't heard any definition of this, but I know the definition of a free world, and I stand behind those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear plea. Now, let me turn to Roberta and ask you, does the EU have what it takes here in this whole thing? I mean, are we ready to become a global geopolitical player and to speak with Josep Borrell, to speak the language of power?
So first of all, thank you, Roland, for having me here. Nice to see Alex and Margareta and Noah joining us. So whether we are ready or not, whether we fully realize it or not, Europe is at the center of the geopolitical sand shifting that we are witnessing. We need to accept that we are at the center of it, you know, from a political, geographical and economic perspective. You know, the European way of a steadfast belief in mixed economies, but based on liberal democratic principles, is a model with which we can compete in the world. And we have to be able to compete because, having just listened to Alex and Margareta, and as we will continue to discuss, we're facing, you know, a very, very an exponentially increase in the strength of China. We have a disagreeable neighbor in Russia. We have Belarus in boiling point. We have a rise of India. We have an uncertain UK to our north. We have a very unstable southern Mediterranean. And talking about the United States, it has not always proven to be reliable. Now, of course, we have a lot of hope in this current administration, also tangible cooperation, as we saw with the Airbus and Boeing agreement. But I think we would be naive to think that Trumpism will not have long-lasting fallouts and that we will be feeling that effect for a very long time. So I would not use this expected greater predictability or safeguard as an umbrella for the future relations. You know, what is the United States idea of what should be in Europe might not be the European Union's idea of what should be in Europe. And on this this, particularly on the position of Russia, we need to speak here in a much stronger voice. So the answer to your question is, are we ready? I think it is complicated. And it is complicated also because sometimes we look at other continents speaking and being better prepared in talking about generational terms while we are too busy trying to rebrand ourselves or trying to find words that match our policies rather than the other way around. You know, we hear of America first, we hear of Made in China 2025. We're sort of talking, are we discussing sovereignty? Are we discussing strategic autonomy, where we should be discussing the overarching themes that make Europe good? And let's look back at this year and see where we have done things that were unprecedented before. When China was buying up our ports or coming into Europe with very advanced technological infrastructure, we had to respond with an unprecedented amount of funds that will go into saving the face of Europe by calling it the next generation, by adopting so much programs that will be used for the generations by our children for years to come. But we were not ready to do that before the pandemic. We had to figure out what to do. On COVAX, let's also be proud to say that the European Union and Europe has been the largest donor of vaccines. We're talking about a funding of facility of over 2.8 billion euros so far. And let's not call this vaccine diplomacy. This is our role in the world, and we actually carry it out with no strings attached, because that's where Europe can actually stand up and be counted. Another point is, I think we must realize that if the EU does not step up, other countries and other global players might do that. There might be other players more interested in creating tension, as we can see now, with irregular migration pressure on the Belarusian-Lithuanian border. What if Europe doesn't speak with one voice on that? What if Europe does not push back against any other player that is only interested in muzzling dissidents in Belarus, like Roman Protasevich? Here we spoke in a clear, united voice, but we need to do more of that. So there is the impression floating around that Europe is a little bit in between, you know, pushing for economic strength while being a human rights defense player. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think we need to consider ourselves being not caught up in the middle, but at the center. And once we recognize that role, then I think we can truly compete with one voice across the world.
But let me be a little bit more concrete here. I mean, how do we, what has to change in Europe so that we speak more with one voice? And that's a problem that several speakers already brought to our attention. Also President Zorinda in his introductory speech. So how do we create more unity in EU foreign security policy, but also how do we shape up in technology? Europe is not that great in innovating in the decisive areas of technological progress.
Yes, you are right. I mean, so far, I think Europe has taken a rather laissez-faire approach to seeing other countries rolling out AI infrastructure at a very strong pace. And I would definitely be the one pushing for the national so-called recovery plans that at the moment are being discussed in the national parliaments, that are essentially European money that needs to go to precisely those areas. Because the biggest tragedy would be if we fall back into our old ways once we emerge from this pandemic into going back to being at a disadvantage, not having enough impetus on research, on innovation, in making our young people that the first instinct of somebody who has entrepreneurial spirit is not to go to the United States, but actually find a home in the European Union to study, to work. And what President Zorinda said was correct, that we need to be able to look back at where we might not have succeeded, where we even failed in the past, but let's not repeat those mistakes. It's the easiest thing to blame. Look, I work in the parliament, I represent an institution, a number of colleagues who say we need to speak with one voice. Do we really speak with one voice? Are we strong enough to make sure that we push other players, not only in Brussels, but also in other countries and their capitals, that for this we could actually lose if we do not speak with one voice with regards to Russia, with with regards to China, with regards to what's happening in our neighborhood, then we will all lose. Our children will lose. And I think it's a matter of now or never. And we need to use, I think, the fact that the European Union stood up in difficulty over this past year. And we use that example in order to map how we work in the future. We have to be able to do it. If we don't, I think we would have wasted not only time, resources, but billions of euros. And it would be on us, on our shoulders.
Okay, sorry to be insisting here on this, but
insist as much as
qualified majority voting. We've had several vetoes on important foreign policy questions, resolutions, declarations in the Council, especially in the last couple of weeks. And we have a push towards qualified majority voting on some foreign policy questions. Large countries tend to be in favor, small countries tend to be against. You come from Malta. What is your answer to this?
My answer would be that the use of a veto as a threat is never the answer. But I would also not allow this to become a big country speak for everyone else. So I'm a little bit in the middle on this. I would not think that removing the veto on such sensitive areas is necessarily going to solve the issue, but I would talk about negotiation like we saw in the past, where especially those countries on the periphery or those countries that feel that in economic terms, there is a big coming together. When it comes to migration, there is no big coming together because we're talking about human beings and a comfort of being far away from the problem. That is not going to be solved by vetoes. That is going to be solved by coming together and understanding that being around this table is better than being outside of it. And this in a post-Brexit, very sensitive scenario that we are living in. But again, you just mentioned something that we are currently, haven't even discussed, but we are currently living through this conference on the future of Europe. A big word, but it doesn't have to be big. It can be really explained in what matters to each and every person living in each and every one of our countries. Alex mentioned before, they don't know what the European Union is doing. I would say the same for most citizens in the European Union. Do they know what is happening? Do they know what is being done and how this could affect their lives? But that's our responsibility, not only to communicate, but to listen and to understand what people want from us. So that's, the big challenge we have. And it's not a matter of treaty, changing and big words changing, but actually in practice making a difference in everyone's lives.
Thank you very much. Let me now turn to Noah Barkin, who's been listening patiently. And coming back to this question of relations between the European Union and China and the United States. And Noah, I'd like to ask you, is a transatlantic consensus on a comprehensive China strategy possible? And comprehensive means including economic relations. And should we even aim for it? Back to Alexander's statement from the beginning. What is your take on this?
Well, thanks, Roland, for having me. Hello to all my fellow panelists. I'm sitting in Berlin. I would rather be in a cabin on a lake in Finland. That looks very nice over there, Alex. But my vacations haven't started yet. Oh, Baltic Sea, I'm sorry. Can you see Nord Stream 2 from where you are?
I would if it was here. We're 80 kilometers from Estonia in that direction.
Okay. So to get to your question, Roland, is a transatlantic consensus on a comprehensive China strategy possible? I think some form of transatlantic consensus is possible, and we saw the emergence of that at the G7 summit. If you look through the communique that the leaders put out earlier this month, there was agreement on a range of issues: human rights, Taiwan, the need for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, the fact that China's economic system, its state-driven capitalist system, poses real challenges for market economies. And we've also seen the U.S., the Biden administration, parroting the EU language on China, this partner, competitor, systemic rival, the holy trinity. So consensus, yes, but I don't think we can realistically talk about a comprehensive transatlantic strategy. And that's simply because, and Alex touched on this, the US and Europe view China through very different prisms. The US is the incumbent superpower. It feels threatened by a rising China. It sees China not only as an economic competitor with very different values, but also as a security threat. And let's face it, Europe does not feel threatened in the same way. It does share many of the same concerns about the direction that China is heading in, but it has less skin in the game than the US, and importantly, it has not given up on the idea of engagement with China in the way many in the US have. I would push back against Alex's suggestion that the US wants to disconnect completely. I think Donald Trump did give a few interviews that suggested that, but we have a new administration that I think is taking a more nuanced view. I think the biggest hurdle to a common transatlantic China policy is in the trade, investment, and technology sphere. Others have touched on this. You know, there is still appetite in the big European capitals for robust economic engagement with China, while in the US, the approach has been, and I think is likely to continue to be, more restrictive. We've seen, you know, a more aggressive use of export controls. We've seen bans on investment in certain Chinese companies, and Europe is not on the same planet here. So I think finding a common transatlantic approach on the economic issues is going to be difficult. And I think there is, you know, we have to be honest, there is potential for tensions there going forward. If the US is putting up hurdles for its firms in terms of engagement with China, and the US and the EU is not, we are gonna bash heads at some point. So I would say that a broad consensus is possible. When you delve into the details, it gets more complex, more contentious, and I think we are about to see, now that the EU and the US are really engaging on China, you know, in a number of different formats, we're going to see how contentious it actually gets.
Thank you, Noah. I still see a slight contradiction in the argument that Europe should be economically independent of the US and do its own China policy. And at the same time, you have even European business representatives like the Federation of German Industry saying that precisely China's state capitalism is a threat to us, or even economically, let alone to our liberal democracy. And these were German entrepreneurs who said this. So, but we'll discuss this in the remaining part of the debate. I would now like to turn to Anna with the results of our Slido poll.
Thank you, Roland. Yes, indeed, we do have the results of our poll. 65% of our viewers think that Europe's place should be firmly at the side of the US and other democracies. 24% think that it is complicated. And only 12% think that Europe's place is as independent third force outside of the US-China rivalry. I also have two questions from our online viewers that I'd like to leave with you. The first one is, the EU is having an internal debate on its own values. How can these values represent the basis for an effective foreign policy? The second question, is European strategic autonomy really the key to success, or should the EU try to increase cooperation with countries such as Japan and India? Roland, over to you.
Yes, you know, I'd love to dish out both of these questions to every speaker, but that's not going to work. So the question of allies such as Japan and maybe other countries of the Indo-Pacific. How about to you, Alexander? How do you see this question of possible allies to America and Europe in other parts of the world, especially in Asia? Over to you, Alexander.
Well, I mean, first of all, as predicted and actually really good, and in many ways, the type of a poll that we would get in an EP Pro land. And I really like the sort of balanced approach of Noah on the whole package, sort of trying to find a broad consensus. And thirdly, I really felt strongly attached to Roberta's thesis about Europe being starting point is that Europe is, and that of course that we need to stick to our alliances. That, of course, is China. But I think we need to understand the ASEAN a little bit better when we deal with China as well, and we need to understand the role of China as a regional power to be able to, how would I say, work in the region in a proper type of a way. There are historic examples. I just listened to Walter Isaacson's biography on Henry Kissinger, and most of it is actually focused on one and the other hand on China. So, we can't go in this without understanding the complicated issues of the region. But yes, I would be looking for the types of allies that were mentioned in the question.
And I would just
sorry,
like to
I'm low on batteries. Yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. We get the message,
Yeah.
Alexander. Let me just emphasize this one point that, in fact, when we talk about allies among the democracies of Asia, for example, such as South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, India, we're also emphasizing that democracy is not reserved to Europe and North America. That actually, we're not talking about European values here, we're talking about universal values. And there is no reason to suspect that, it's somehow culturally impossible for Chinese to build a thriving liberal democracy, as the Taiwanese are proving before our very eyes. Okay, let me turn to the other question about values and the internal debate, and turn to Margareta. To what extent is the internal debate on values, societal values, LGBT questions, rule of law, to what extent is that weakening Europe's ability to actually play a global role and support democracy globally? Over to you, Margareta.
Thank you very much, Roland. What I would like to say is, I don't think an open debate weaken Europe. I think the debate strengthen, because if we really want to support LGBT rights, if we want to support ethnic minorities, if we want to support freedom of religion and other values that's really important for a free society, we need as well to have the free and open debate. Without a debate, just to be quiet, in my opinion, this is the totally opposite. This is what make society less inclusiveness, less acceptable, and I am very much pro the debate and openness. That's the only way forward as I see it.
Indeed, thank you. Maybe Roberta, you would like to come in on this very briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Margareta just said. This also is a question that is currently ongoing also with relations to Russia, in terms of how different countries in the European Union see whether you come to the table and discuss or not, and if you do discuss, would that destabilize the unity, or at the same time create an alliance that shouldn't be with a player that is completely anathema to those values that have just been mentioned. But at the same time, do we look away? Do we engage? Do we risk being painted as being hypocritical? Sometimes, where we close our eyes to things happening within our territory, within our borders, when we talk with authority to countries that we want to partner up with? Do we make a distinction, as the representatives of the German industry said, between who is an economic competitor and who is completely contradictory to what our human rights ideas, respect that Europe was ultimately built from, are completely ignored or violated. And this is a discussion we have every day. And we need to have that debate. And that's why Margareta is right, that the worst thing we could do is not to debate that. But I think on this, the European Union has improved since I've I've seen it sort of over the years, that there has been this bigger propensity to speak a little bit more with one voice. I haven't mentioned Turkey yet. We know when we didn't, how difficult that was. The fallout from what would otherwise have been, let's say, a normal run-of-the-mill meeting where the lines were drawn and the facts were made. As a result, we talked about optics. We talked about who talks in the name of who. Those are mistakes that we should avoid, rather than not engaging with those who are, let's say, saber rattling at our borders. We saw, again, Turkey with Greece last year, using migrants as vulnerable geopolitical pawns in order to destabilize the external borders of Europe. A bit of a technical point, but it matters to a very important country in our union. And what are we doing? Why don't we speak with one voice? Why don't we alert when there are things that are not acceptable for us? Why don't I speak when something is not acceptable for me? And I think that in the European Parliament, where I currently sit, there is more of that. And I see that with let's say, with pride when looking back at how it was in the past.
Indeed. Noah, let me turn back to this a mantra, as it has become in Europe now, of China being our strategic partner on some issues, such as climate change, for example, China being an economic competitor and a systemic rival. And I think it was the chairman of the China delegation of the European Parliament, Reinhard Bütikofer, who said that, well, you can't really be a strategic partner on Monday, an economic competitor on Tuesday, and a systemic rival on Wednesday. So here's my proposal, and I wonder whether you would subscribe to this. If we slightly change the grammar and the syntax of this whole statement and say that China is a systemic rival with whom we nevertheless have to cooperate on a few things. You know, one is the noun, the other is the verb, you know. The noun is what we are. We can't really change that. And we haven't picked the systemic rivalry. I mean, long before the use of that term by the European Commission and, by the way, the German Federation of Industries, which used systemic competitor. So long before that, we had a so-called document number 9 by the Chinese Communist Party, which clearly defined the rule of law and freedom of opinion as a systemic threat to the People's Republic. So if we say that we are systemic rivals, and we can't change this for the moment, but what we can change is what we do with China. And there we have to select cooperation here and maybe a stronger pushback on different areas, such as cyber attacks against hospitals, for example, such as the wolf warrior diplomacy and other acts of arm twisting and aggressive foreign policy. So Noah, over to you. How do you see this whole thing about a cooperation, competition, and pushback?
Well, I think the beauty of these three terms is that one, in Europe, you know, a block of 27 different countries that all can agree on this. On this sort of division of partner, competitor, and systemic rival. So I think when this was unveiled a little over 2 years ago at by the European Commission and the EEAS in a joint communication, this was quite a step forward. I mean, the use of the term systemic rival had never been used before, and by European comparisons, that was sort of the language of power. But I think what we're seeing is that it's becoming more and more difficult to compartmentalize the relationship. We saw that with, you know, in December when the EU sealed this political agreement on the investment deal with China, and then a few months later imposed human rights sanctions on fairly targeted and limited human rights sanctions on officials Xinjiang. And China hit back, and now that investment agreement is sort of in tatters. So I think it is going to become increasingly difficult to keep these three terms alive. I mean, when you talk about partnership, what you're talking about climate. People also talk about non-proliferation, biodiversity. It's becoming thinner and thinner, the number of topics in the partnership basket. And some people question whether climate should even be defined as partnership. That's also an area, is going to increasingly be an area of competition in green technologies, etc. I think I agree with you, Roland, that we're sort of shifting more in the direction of systemic rivalry, but I think there are vested interests, certainly in the capital that I'm sitting in, Berlin, who are very wedded to the partnership side of the equation. So I don't expect the EU to depart from this, but I think the key question is about how you strike the balance. And even the US is using these three terms now. But I think the balance in the US is certainly different than it is here in the EU.
All right, thank you. And I think we should maybe come back to the economic dimension here and the very stark complaints even of European enterprises about copyright violations, about state-owned enterprises which can always compete with more of a capital base against private companies in the West that have to raise their capital themselves, and of course the whole question of dumping prices. Then also, of course, the question of what kind of conditions are there for the use of labor, such as, for example, in Xinjiang. And so taking all this together, is any one of you, and I'm asking all four of you, is any one of you convinced that Europe would do better on its own negotiating with China on these issues? Or should we seek a common stance with the United States before we address China and try to address precisely these issues of, telling the Chinese that, listen, I mean, competition is not possible under the conditions which you have created, for example, with state-owned enterprises. Mm-hmm. And Roberta, over to you.
Yeah, your question threw me back to 8 years ago when we had Obama presidency and administration, and there I think there was various attempts, some more successful than others, to create this global coalition, with a sort of horse trading between the EU and the United States on various parts of the world. I think it's a little bit, perhaps I would say, early to know whether we have a stable partnership with the United States. I think there are good, let's say, things that give us hope, like what we saw with Biden's first acts on the Paris Agreement, and what Noah mentioned, this forever sort of decreasing list of things we can find commonalities on, but it's ultimately about leadership. And if you have the political will to get together and push back against a competitor, but that is also recognizing that you are in itself and in ourselves, each other's competitors between the US and the EU, but also with Japan and other countries and India among others, but understanding that would actually push back on what we are seeing in China with the practices that are unacceptable to us, but still that are happening, and they are being very felt by our industries, by our economies. So I think that there needs to be this renewed impetus for that to happen. The role that the United Kingdom will play is also very important, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, where you see nuances which you'd see before, but at the time UK was inside the European Union. But make no mistake, that is also something we need to keep an eye out, that this is, again, is the EU going to be competing with the UK in this area? And in that case, where will the US, who will the US partner up with, and who is the strong man, so to speak, on the table? That's our responsibility and our challenge ultimately.
Okay, and we have just 7.5 minutes left. Let me bring up one last important point here, and that's the Russian-Chinese couple, as I may call it. And again, referring to Sergei Lavrov's article of yesterday, where he completely sees both Russia and China in the lead of a global pushback against Western arrogance and supremacy and so on. So, I mean, let's remember Henry Kissinger in the 1970s. You remember he strategically advised President Nixon to basically kiss and make up with China in order to drive a wedge between the communist powers of the era, which were the Soviet Union and the People's Republic, and you know, with a huge and for many painful change of attitudes between the U.S. and the People's Republic, and a recognition and all this. It seems like the stunt worked to an extent. Now, some people today are advising a reverse Kissinger, as I would call it. In other words, trying to make some steps towards Russia in order to somehow pry Russia away from the partnership with the People's Republic of China. And Alexander, I'm looking at you. President Macron seems to also be an adherent of this strategy. How realistic is this in your view? And to what lengths should the West, or maybe the European Union, go to actually accommodate Russia and somehow give it more incentives to move away from China? Over to you, Alexander. Oops, we lost the connection, I think. No, there you are. No, let me turn to Noah with this question. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Alexander,
yeah,
with the connection is bad.
To fill that old charge. No, yeah. I found an old charger, and I.
Should I go ahead and answer?
Yes, Noah, go ahead. Alexander, wait a second. Noah, go ahead.
Yes. Well, you're absolutely right, Roland. Emmanuel Macron has been talking about this for a couple of years and been sharply criticized. And I think he wasn't very amused by all the praise that Biden received for meeting Putin earlier this month. When he was criticized for this idea. But I think if you go from the assumption that China is and will be foreign policy priority number 1, 2, and 3 for Washington in the coming decades, which I think is true, if you think further ahead, I think we will see attempts by the U.S. to reach out to Moscow. I think the problem is that under Vladimir Putin, no one is under any illusions that this is going to be successful. Now, I've forgotten when Mr. Putin leaves office. I think it's sometime in the mid-30s. So it may be a long wait. But I think this is something that is going to be coming back again and again. We are going to see an attempt by Washington to reach out. The only question is, will Russia? Will they be able to have a conversation with Russia?
Okay, Margareta, isn't the systemic difference between the West and Russia and China on the other side so strong that they will always recognize the West as an existential threat and therefore are kind of stuck with each other? Or do you see any future dissension between Beijing and Moscow?
Well, I would say there is a competition between Russia and China, just because it's two countries with a different totalitarian system. It doesn't mean that they cooperate. I could also see that there is a competition. We could see it both when it's not that much when we see on trade, but we could see it in investment, where there is a huge competition. We could see it in the Arctic region, where there is both Russia and China is there, and they have a very strong competition about research, about investment, about the land. We could see it in Central Asia, where there is as well a competition between China and Russia, who will make the most outcome. I could see how Russia tried to connect the Central Asia country in the Euro-Asian economic union. I could see the military connections. I could see how China tried to invest, how China tried to build the Silk Road, for example. So there is a competition. I don't say that there is not a competition, and I could also see that there is the competition towards European Union. But I am a very strong believer in the rule-based world, in market economy, in the belief of the fundamental rights, and that's why I think that we have a much better position in Europe than we in both Russia and China have, and but we have to take care about this, of course. It's not that we will always have this. We have also to build on our system and our values, invest in them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to actually close on this optimistic note with the main takeaway that if we talk about transatlantic relations and China, that a consensus on certain strategic core of points, of policies is possible and desirable. And that the second note, referring to this question of past and future that I referred to several times over the debate, you know, I mean, 100 years ago, the West seemed to be finished. You know, the West seemed to, the democratic capitalism looked old and tired and actually belonging to the past compared to those big new totalitarian collectivist movements that seemed to be so futuristic at the time.
Huge.
You know, and that was, and then came Hitler and came Stalin. And then came actually the best ride that liberal democracy has ever had in world history. So, you know, the West has this capacity, you know, surprising to many and annoying to its detractors, of bouncing back when you least expect it. And I think that should keep us optimistic in this indeed systemic rivalry that we're living through. And if we really take care and if we plan our moves correctly and work with our allies, we can prevail in this conflict of the era. So I would like to thank you. Thank you, Roberta, here in the studio. Thank you, Alexander, Margareta, and Noah online. And thank you all for watching, for participating with your questions and the poll. And over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Roland and panelists, for such a great and interesting discussion. Dear viewers, we will now break for 15 minutes, but tune in at 18:15 for an exclusive interview with the Eurogroup President, Pascal Donohoe. See you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, to finish our first day of EIF on a high note, we are extremely honored to have with us the president of the Eurogroup, Pascal Donohoe, who will be interviewed by the Martin Center Senior Research Officer, Dr. Owen Drea. Owen, we are all ears.
Thank you, Anna. And welcome to all our visitors from around Brussels and indeed from around Europe. A special welcome to our guest speaker, Pascal Donohoe, Minister of Finance for Ireland and President of the Eurogroup. Just before we start, please do ask a question directly to me at Andre on Twitter. Our hashtag is EIF21, or on the Martin Centre Facebook or Twitter pages. Minister, welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I would just like to start by talking about the current economic outlook. We're kind of in this borderline economic recovery phase. We've got GDP, consumption is bouncing back, but still we've got the hangover of significantly increased public debt. I was just wondering about how do you view the current economic outlook, and how can we ensure long-term recovery and not just kind of a short-term economic rebound?
Good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this forum. I am optimistic, Owen, about the short-term outlook, but there is a key risk, which I'll mention in a moment. But we do need to be careful about sustaining our progress into the medium term. So the way I would phrase it at the moment is I think we are in the early phase of a rebound, but a rebound is not the same as a recovery. A rebound, however, is the first step that we need in the delivery of a recovery, because without the rebound then leading to a recovery, the challenges that we have with employment, the challenges that we have with income growth, and the challenges that we have with debt sustainability will then not be surmountable. I believe overall that in Ireland and across Europe, even at the moment, our growth prospects across 2022 and 2023 are actually understated. And while we do have a number of risks that we need to manage, most notably the variant risk, I do believe that across Europe, national governments and the European Union have been successful in supporting our economies and protecting them during a time of pandemic, and that is now laying the foundation for a rebound that then has the ability to lead to a recovery. But we can't take the recovery for granted, and it will need continued monitoring, intervention and support.
Yeah, that's very interesting when you say, when you mentioned about understated growth prospects, because as you know, the Commission has recently revised many of its forecasts. One thing that there is, I think, increasingly a lot of talk about in Brussels and I think among economists globally is how policymakers are going to manage the inflation dilemma. On one hand, there's the very kind of understandable risk that you can't cut off or taper COVID-era supports too quickly. But on the other hand, I suppose there is a worrying fear, particularly in elements of our political family, about inflation and about is this inflation a temporary transient phenomenon driven by the external circumstances, or is it maybe a precursor to actually a more kind of permanent situation? I was just wondering, are you worried by the inflation situation, or in your view, is it at the moment still a transient phenomenon?
So it is something that we need to monitor, but if I look at the other economic risks that we have at the moment, I would not have it as a preeminent risk in the short to early part of the medium term. The huge challenge that we have at the moment that is a more higher ranking issue for me is how we rebuild employment and how we're able to open up our economy safely, and by doing that lead to a resumption of income growth for our citizens and employment growth. As we do that, I do believe it is very likely we are going to encounter inflationary pressures and trends. But I am in the hold of view that once we deliver a safe reopening for our economy in Ireland and across Europe, that will act as an antidote to the inflationary pressures that may build in the short term. So to answer your question directly, I do believe it is a risk. However, I believe there are other risks, and I believe that risk is going to manifest itself in the short term. And my judgment for now is the safe reopening of our economies combined with employment growth will act as an antidote to the short-term development of inflation.
Okay, yes, I understand. If I could just move on a little bit, I think one thing that's particularly starting to be understood is that the scale of the economic disruption brought about by the pandemic has really brought a renewed kind of focus on issues to do with fairness and equality, be it gender, be it income, be it taxation, be it member state solidarity. And I'd just like to briefly talk about how this might impact upon the governance of the Eurozone, because the Commission will soon relaunch their review of economics governance of the Eurozone. And I was just wondering, do you think this is a time where possibly we could be looking at some really fundamental reforms? I'm always struck by the fact that, you know, economics is, after all, it's a social science. It's not a mathematical science. So do you think that maybe, you know, we need to move towards a focus more on judgment and experience? I'm talking about what, you know, Banerjee and Duflo have talked about in terms of this plumbing approach, that how economics can guide the economy. And I'm thinking in particular in context of the pandemic. I'd just be interested if you had any thoughts on how economics might actually change and how we view it.
Well, I think it's a wonderful question, and I love the concept of economics as plumbers. And I think the idea, economics as plumbing, and I think that idea is particularly applicable to microeconomic interventions. And to deal with your question regarding how I think economics is going to evolve, firstly, I really agree with you that economics is a social science. And because it is a social science as opposed to a science like physics or chemistry, we need to think about uncertainty in a very different way. And we also always need to be humble about the power and influence of things that we don't know and can't understand because of our position in time. Yeah. So how do I believe economics as a social science could and should evolve? I think it has the ability to evolve in two different axes at the same time. On the micro level, to again go back to the concept of plumbing, we need to always be aware of the value of theory, history and experience in refining targeted and particular interventions that we can make in our economy. And then for the larger macroeconomic policy decisions, we have to, I think, cherish what we can learn from history more and from the value of economic history. And we have to be aware of the unknown in the future and be humble in the face of that, but use the tools that are available to us to try and meld it and shape it. And then coming through the middle of those two ideas and concepts is the value of trust and the value of social cohesion. Because in recognising that economics is a social science, I think we always have to be aware that economies are anchored within societies as opposed to the other way round. And that sequencing is really important for the design of the policy choices that we will need to make in a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think I agree. I have to say I agree with you fully in the importance of economic history, and I think what you say about social cohesion as well is very, very important. And I might just jump ahead to something I was planning to ask at the end, but which I think feeds directly into what you just said, is that I suppose in the centre-right family, in the EPP family, what we see from voter data from from around Europe, from the last German federal elections, from the recent elections in the Netherlands, is there is this growing feeling that centre-right EPP parties are growing kind of slightly detached from not only the younger voters, but from middle-class voters who might be struggling to get on the property ladder, might be struggling with accessibility to childcare, etc. And I think actually what we are seeing is that a lot of the issues which have maybe bedeviled Ireland's economic policy making over the last 10, 15 years are now also becoming more and more evident on a continental level. And I was just wondering kind of how you would view kind of the centre-right, the EPP approach. There would be a view that maybe the EPP should go back and kind of really get kind of a back-to-basics economic campaign, really focus on day-to-day deliverables for working families. I was just wondering if you had any view. I apologise. I know it's slightly off your radar. I'm sure.
Not at all, Sharon. These are the kind of things that we have to grapple with every day, and it's a very timely question, given that before I came to join you for this discussion, I was participating in a national and economic social dialogue here in Ireland, which is a precursor to our budgetary process. So in terms of how we as a political family can respond back to the issues that I think you're fairly raising, a couple of thoughts in relation to it. First, I believe within the EPP and within our broad Christian democratic family, we're a political party and movement that believe in the value of a mixed economy. So the things that are the most important to make progress on, we don't believe an economy that is unregulated can achieve on its own, and we don't believe a government that doesn't recognise the role of entrepreneurship and wealth generation is a government that doesn't recognise those things also isn't in a position to make progress on really important things on its own as well. Yeah. And that is why we, I think, in our political tradition, make the case for a strong and effective state sitting alongside and integrated into an economy that is regulated and is subject to the appropriate degree of both oversight and taxation, which is why I've always rejected the kind of neoliberalism that I believe did become intertwined with centre-right economic policy and politics for too long. You know, the market fundamentalism that will imply that it's only the economy that can deliver things, and it's only the economy that is the repository of wisdom. And within that definition of the economy, that was always defined as the free market. Whereas I think we can take a step back from that and say it's the combination of both that has so much to offer. So I think we need to approach the kind of debates that you're talking about there, Owen, with confidence and with by making the case that it is a state and an economy working together that can make progress on things that really matter to those who are finding life difficult in national and global economies that are changing so quickly. Yeah. So that is why, as a political family, we should make the case for social and public housing, while recognising that the market economy also has a role to play in delivering additional housing. It's when we come to taxation, we should make the case that those who have the most should pay the most, but levels of tax that are too high can also act as a disincentive to the competitiveness and the ability of an economy to grow. So, Owen, I think we could spend all night discussing that particular question, but there's some ideas as a starter to get going on them.
Yeah, and I think, Minister, as you say, I think what will also be very interesting, or a very interesting example that's now a non-EU example, will be that of the British Conservative Party policy in the UK in terms of this much heralded process of levelling up. And, maybe also Britain is also a warning about, in attempts to broaden electoral support, you have to be very careful about your base, as we're now seeing probably in the south and the southeast of England. I just want to jump back to I suppose your more pressing day-to-day agenda, which is we here in the Martin Centre, we were heavily involved around 2013, 2014 in issues relating to banking union and the completion of banking union. I was just wondering, in your role as president of the Eurogroup, do you detect kind of a political will to kind of work towards a finalisation of what has now been a kind of a reform that's been hanging around for almost a decade? I realise it's a very complex issue in terms of minimising banking risk, etc. But do you detect kind of a political willingness or a political momentum that might see some type of agreement reached in the coming years?
Well, there is political willingness and political momentum behind doing it, but I think it would be fair to say that we have more progress to do to achieve, to turn that momentum into concrete agreements. So that was, I think, typified by the progress that we have made over the last 6 to 8 months overall. We made progress towards the end of last year in the strengthening the safety nets of banking union, in strengthening the role of the Single Resolution Fund and the European Stability Mechanism. But you'll be aware that in our most recent Eurogroup meeting, we were not able to get progress on a revised and credible work plan for the completion of banking union. So I would summarise it as momentum and commitment being there, but we have to work harder, Owen, to get that momentum to the final stage so that we're able to deliver an agenda for more work and more progress in the life cycle of the current Commission. So we have achieved much, but we have a lot more to do.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Yeah, it's interesting because I think the feeling was in Brussels was that around 2013, 2014, I suppose the legacy of the Great Recession and the political capital that had to be expended to get Europe through that crisis really resulted in some unfinished reforms like banking union. So it's I suppose we're hopeful and we hope to see movement on that issue in the future.
But I quickly make the point, Owen, that while you are absolutely correct to point to what more needs to be done, you're dead right to say that, we should also acknowledge progress that has been made and work that has been completed. So if you look at the regulatory framework that we have in place for our banking system here in Europe, if you would look at the single supervisory mechanism, the single supervisory board, if you would look at the changes that were just agreed there last November, if you look at the fact that our banking system has come through a pandemic, but we have not seen a recurrence of the very difficulties that we all experienced a decade ago, that does point to progress made. But equally though, your characterisation of it being an incomplete union when it comes to banking union is fair. And we have further work that we need to do in the next couple of years to make progress in some important areas.
Yeah, thank you. We only have maybe 6 or 7 minutes left, but I have received a couple of questions which are broadly, variations of the same topic, which was looking back now on the last kind of 5 or 6 years of the Brexit process. I suppose specifically from an Irish context, what do you think are the real lessons of Brexit that Ireland can take, kind of moving forward?
So the two that I would offer is that the Brexit process will be ongoing. It is a process, it's not a project. It was a game changer for Ireland with regard to the United Kingdom deciding to leave the European Union. And we need to ready ourselves for developments, for challenges, and also for opportunities that will always be ongoing. But then as we are in that stream of activity, I strongly believe that the best structure, the best compass that Ireland has for guiding itself through that is our membership of the European Union. And Brexit has reaffirmed for me that the Union is an extraordinary project for deepening our economic and political and our social freedoms. So that is my abiding learning from where we are at the moment. And I think one of the other really important issues in recent years has been not to underestimate the value of solidarity within the European Union, but to recognise that it takes time to build that solidarity, but once it's in place, it's deeply, deeply precious and deeply valuable.
Thank you, Minister. And I think we just have time for one final question, which also came into me on Twitter, and that's about the role of small states in the European Union. Do you think that the pandemic has, and Brexit, I guess, has kind of strengthened the position of small states in the European Union, or at least in a sense given them more confidence to be able to speak more freely and be more confident about putting forward what their priorities are at a Brussels on a Brussels stage? I was at an event in Estonia a couple of weeks ago, and this kind of came up as an issue about how small states can have more confidence in Brussels, and Ireland was taken as the obvious example.
So I think Brexit really had that effect. And I think Brexit reminded small and medium-sized countries of the imperative that we have to be able to make our case with confidence and with clarity within the European Union. And that has happened. You now have so many different coalitions that have developed, depending on the policy area, in which small and medium-sized countries are now playing a more central role. And my experience is that the larger economies and larger member states that we will work with recognise that this is of value, and recognise that it can lead to decisions that are more resilient and that are more broadly implemented and done so quicker within the European Union. So I would attribute that development to Brexit. And it reminds me of an article I read in The Economist there a couple of weeks ago, where they predicted the demise of small state privilege. And small states within the European Union do not, nor should they, ever create a sense of privilege about their status in this political project. But what I think is happening is small and medium-sized countries now realise the need for more regular political engagement with each other to lead to more issue-specific coalitions that in turn allow more inclusive decision-making processes to be in place. So that spirit is alive and well within the European Union, and every month when Eurogroup meets and ECOFIN meets, Owen, I see that approach alive and well.
Well, that's good to hear. Just before I wrap up, just to kind of come back to looking forward to the post-pandemic recovery. I think recent months, somewhat surprisingly to some people, have seen favourable results for, centre-right parties in state and local elections recently in France, in Germany, but also in Spain and in Finland. Do you think that, if we look forward towards the 2024 European elections, that, how we manage the recovery will be the defining factor in how centre-right parties fare in the upcoming elections?
Very much so, Owen. It will have a really big effect on how we fare in the 2024 European elections and all the national elections that will happen before then. And I would make the case that the reason why we have seen some success at national level in the last few months for our political family is we are demonstrating the value of the political centre in European politics. Yeah. We're showing why it matters, and we're showing that it can play a deeply valuable role at a time of such a severe challenge to the European project. So for me, if we make our case with humility, but also make our case with confidence, I believe our prospects are positive. We cannot take them for granted, but I do believe the recent elections that you've just mentioned should give us confidence about the ability to make our case and for that to be heard by citizens in the European Union.
Yes, thank you. And just before we let you go, just for those in Brussels who don't realise, I think it's safe to say that you're well known as a bookworm and as a regular book reviewer. I was just wondering if you could recommend one or two books for our vacation reading this summer.
My God. Yeah, I love reading, and you've caught me on the hop now. If I was to pick out two books,
yeah.
So I will pick a book of history, and then I will pick an Irish novel.
Okay.
So if I begin with a book of history, I read a book there a few weeks ago called The Sovereign Isle by Robert Toome. And this was a novel, a work of history by a British historian of France, okay, who was making the case for Brexit and why he voted leave and why he believed that Brexit was more consistent with the sweep of British history than membership of the European Union.
Okay.
And while I vehemently disagree with what he wrote about Ireland and completely disagree with what he writes about the Eurozone in the book, it is still the most elegant articulation for the rationale for Brexit that I have come across in quite a while, Owen. Okay. And I do think it is worth a read. And then if I was to recommend a novel, I would recommend an Irish novelist called Ronan Hessian, who has published two books, the latest book of which is about a footballer who has an incident in his career that really affects the rest of his footballing career and his family. And it feels a very appropriate novel, given the European Championship are on at the moment. But it is about soccer, but about life really. Sport is just an analogy and an introduction into a deeply warm novel, and that's called Panichetta. And then his novel before that is a beautiful novel called Leonard and Hungry Paul. And I think in these times, we all need a little bit of humour, we all need a little bit of warmth, and we need fires that are about heat as opposed to burning. And those two novels are a nice sequence that will do that. What would you recommend, Owen?
I think the one book I would recommend would be, again, an Irish novel, which I think everybody in Europe has read at this stage, which is Normal People, or at least seen on the TV adaptation last year. One other book, just to finish up before we go.
And Sally Rooney, of course, has another novel coming out later on in the year.
Exactly.
So maybe if any member of our EPP family has not read Sally Rooney, that's a good place to begin.
Absolutely. Well, Minister, I want to thank you very much. I really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you found it useful. Hopefully a little bit more exciting maybe than some of the Eurogroup meetings. So thank you very much. I want to thank all our viewers. And with that, I will hand everybody back to Anna.
Thank you, Owen, for that beautiful and extremely interesting interview. Dear audience, for today, it's a wrap. Thank you very much for joining us, and we are looking forward to welcoming you tomorrow at 10 with 2 more debates, an exclusive interview with Donald Tusk, a keynote address by Manfred Weber, and remarks by the EPP Secretary General Antonio Lopez Istúriz. Thank you once again, and see you tomorrow.